Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. My name is Svetlana Doneva, and on today's episode, I'm at the head office of Pharma Dynamics. Pharma Dynamics is one of the country's biggest generic drug manufacturers, and on today's episode, I'm talking to Paul Anley, the founder and CEO of the company. Paul, you're a pharmacist by training, and you started your career in the mid-80s behind the desk in a pharmacy. It's 30 years on, and you're running one of the country's biggest generic drug companies. Can you tell me how you made that leap from operations to entrepreneurship?
Well, I've always had an interest in business. I did my MBA back in 1988, soon after qualifying in pharmacy. And then I went on to become the marketing manager of the Link Pharmacy Group, which I did for 4 years. And back in 92, 93, I saw a huge need for generics in South Africa, and generics was still a very small infant industry. So I established a generic pharmaceutical company back then for one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, Warner Lambert. So I guess that was my foray into business.
Okay, and after that you went on to work at Pfizer. Tell me about that jump.
Well, Pfizer bought out Warner Lambert in 2000 in a very hostile takeover. And back then, Pfizer saw generics as a significant threat. And it was clear that our sole shareholder was not going to support a generic strategy. It was either going to close down the business or dispose of it. So I elected at that stage to start my own pharmaceutical company, which is today Pharma Dynamics.
Okay, now you mentioned that when you were working with Warner Lambert and Pfizer, the generic market in the country was still a very tiny portion of the bigger pharmaceutical market. It's changed so much over the last 15 years, and your company has also grown over that same period. You're now the fourth largest generic company in the country. Tell me about how that market has changed and how the red tape and the regulation has changed, and how the company Pharma Dynamics has grown alongside the industry.
Well, back in the late 80s, early 90s, generics were really pretty much unknown. They accounted for maybe 15% market share. Today, well in excess of 50% of all prescriptions are now for generic medication. And of course, over that period, many products have come off patent and are genericizable. So it was a natural progression for the industry to grow. When you talk about red tape, I think the biggest constraining factor for pharmaceutical companies and generic companies in particular is the delay in registrations with the Medicines Control Council. When I started Pharma Dynamics back in 2001, it was taking us about 2.5 years to get a product registered. It's now taking us 4 or 5 years. So the situation is in fact deteriorating in terms of regulatory approval times. And of course that's a very difficult thing for a startup company. We started Pharma Dynamics with a single product, and we had to generate our cash flows, we had to pay our representatives, etc. And they were calling on the market, literally detailing and selling a single product. And it was only after 2 or 3 years that we built up a portfolio that was sizable enough to pay our own way. And in fact, the first couple of years, we complemented our range with nutraceuticals or complementary medicines, primarily because we needed something to sell over and above, the odd products that we had already got registered.
Now, your majority shareholder, that's Lupin Pharmaceuticals. That's a deal where they acquired 60% of your company back in 1998. That was one of the major turning points in the history of Pharma Dynamics. Can you tell me about what led up to that deal, how it occurred, and how that has affected your business over the last 7 or 8 years?
We decided to sell equity to Lupin for strategic reasons. The generic pharmaceutical industry was one at that stage which was dominated internationally by domestic companies but was very rapidly globalizing. And we had a concern that if we didn't globalize ourselves, that we would be placed under a strategic disadvantage in terms of product development, our pipeline, but also in terms of the cost of manufacturing and sourcing generic products. We knew that we were too small to globalize ourselves by acquisition, so we felt it would be a strategic advantage for us to rather partner through a shareholding structure with a global generic pharmaceutical company.
You're talking about globalizing, and I want to talk about the African continent, growth within our continent. What is your expansion strategy for moving outside of the South African borders?
We're very excited about the African opportunity, but particularly the sub-Saharan opportunities. So for some time we have been submitting product registrations into key markets throughout sub-Saharan Africa. So that would include Nigeria, Kenya, Angola, Mozambique, and we have been very specific in choosing particular brands where we believe that there are more significant opportunities. So it's been a I wouldn't say a niched opportunity, but a very particular strategy that we are following through strategic partnerships with other distributors in Africa.
What are the challenges of operating in the African market? How does it differ from the local market, which you are more used to?
Well, the one significant benefit is we are getting our registrations through far faster than in many of those markets than what we are in South Africa. So our time to market is in fact much less. I think the challenges are probably the most significant. This is a vast continent, and getting product around the continent is particularly difficult. We've chosen to concentrate on some specific countries, but we also concentrate on particular cities. So it's a very targeted strategy. One of the other challenges, of course, Africa is extremely hot. So we have to develop our products with the weather conditions of Africa in mind.
Taking it back home now, in his budget speech for this year, Minister Gordon alluded to the NHI and significant capital outlay destined to rolling out the NHI program in various areas in South Africa. What kind of opportunities does the NHI present for Pharma Dynamics?
Well, I think NHI is very exciting, but we do have to realize it's a long-term strategy and a long-term rollout. So while they have spoken about capital outlays, in fact, the healthcare budget for this coming year is, I would call it, marginally increased. But practically speaking, the NHI will take almost a generation to roll out. The most significant challenge for the government, I believe, would be the skills capacity in the country. So we need to train and develop an entire generation of doctors, of pharmacists, of nurses, etc. Within the pharmaceutical environment, the plan for sourcing pharmaceuticals is a single source central procurement, so it's a tender system, and that will open opportunities for all generic pharmaceutical companies. But I think that we all do have to be realistic. That will come at much lower prices, as is the case in the current state tender system.
I have to ask you, and I know that you get this question a lot. You're the fourth biggest generic company in the country. Ahead of you are Cipla, Adcock, and Aspen. All of those three companies are listed on the JSE. Do you have plans to list your company?
We don't have any immediate plans. we would require a reason to raise the capital, and that would either be to establish a plant in South Africa or alternatively to make a acquisition. We don't believe that there is much opportunity for acquisition in the South African market. Perhaps there is more opportunity in the sub-Saharan markets that I have spoken about, and we have no immediate plans for establishing a plant in South Africa. So the reason for listing would be to acquire another pharmaceutical business in Africa.
Tell me about your biggest entrepreneurship lesson. You've been operational since 2001, have accomplished much. What is the one thing that you did not learn at MBA school?
Well, I think there are two things. The old saying, just do it. There is so much time often spent in building business plans. Of course, you've got to do that, but very often entrepreneurs are hesitant and spend years looking at the market before finally launching. And the second lesson is to take good people with you. I think that has been the one clear advantage that Pharma Dynamics has over many of its other competitors, and that I managed to attract top managers, and all of those have stayed with me, in fact, for the entire journey in Pharma Dynamics since launch.
How do you retain that talent in your case?
Well, I think we have built up a culture that we all love working here. We're passionate about the business, but it feels more like a family business. So I guess it's a sense of ownership that they all have, and I hope that they really enjoy working here.
Tell me, what is your vision and your dream for Pharma Dynamics and also for the country?
Well, I mentioned before that Pharma Dynamics has got enormous way to grow still. We might be the fourth largest, but our competitors are significantly larger. So we believe that we can continue to acquire market share and to grow. There are many products still coming off patent. And in terms of my wishes, if you wish, for the South African market, I would hope that all South Africans can gain access to quality immediate healthcare. It is a constitutional right, after all.
Thank you, Paul. That was Paul Anley, CEO of Pharma Dynamics, and this was the Entrepreneurial Edge. Thank you for watching. See you again next week.